next week, hopefully.
Yeah, get him. I talked to him at the weekend about that. So, hey, good morning, everybody. Welcome to Talking Niagara. Mike is not going to be joining us today, but we'll still talk about the toxic pollution, aka the toxic leak from Dunmurry into the Welland River,
Wow.
and other stories. Right. So, the leak into the Welland River. Mike provided us a report that went into um, a magazine called The Pointer. And the Pointer basically says on the hunt, they're on the hunt for truth. But they deal with stories in Brampton, Mississauga, Niagara region, and this Welland River leak has been reported by them before. In fact, for those who know him, Ed Smith is a local journalism initiative reporter for that particular organization, right?
Seeking truth. I think Fox
Well,
says that too.
the question here is that okay, the leak on the leak from Don Murray was reported by local environmental activists July 2nd, although the leak had been around a few days before that, because there was a film, a film of something on the Welland River. 6 weeks later, in August, despite efforts to identify the source and clean up the contaminants, the leak persisted. And during that time, our friend Mike Cushman had been monitoring the site constantly, and as had Sarah Ward, who had been taking samples of the substance leaking into the river to have it analysed. Nothing in here about the results of the analysis, right? But the point being is we're now in September, and that leak continues.
Yeah, sadly it does, and hats off to Mike, Metaphysical Mike, for doing what he's doing, and and the people that are helping him as well. And we'll talk about it next week, hopefully. But this is a reoccurring thing, and I can't really understand why they can't find the source of this. And I don't know. It's obviously in the industrial park there someplace. Well, at least that's the most probable place it's coming from.
Yeah,
and it ebbs and flows. I guess it sometimes it reduces it. Mike says it might Friday might be dumping time for whatever. I don't know where that might be coming from.
Is it a case of them flushing out some systems on a Friday? Where
maybe, or
worse. Yeah,
or their drains were not. It was somebody's over there's drains were not adapted for pollution. Like, for instance, nowadays most drains don't go directly into the waterway or wherever it is. They have to go to some sort of process in between. Yeah.
And that would be good if we had the sewage separation down in Don Murray. But I think we've run out of funds on sewage separation now.
Well, also, but this is industrial waste, so it's different.
Yeah. Well, there should be different
procedures. I don't even know. I mean, even if it's a shop that's cleaning its, I don't know. It looks like I can't really figure out what it might be, but anyway, we'll see if we get some better clues from Mike next week.
Yeah, and the Pointer's doing a good job, but it's clear that the city came and they put these what has been described as a sock boom across the outlet to stop things like oils leaking out onto the Welland River. But just what has happened is the sock boom is just not sufficient to stop those oils spreading.
No, of course not. I mean,
yeah. And in
I don't know.
fact,
I don't know who's out there changing the socks either.
that's exactly what I was just going to ask. You know, these sock booms are only any good if somebody's refreshing them, changing them, going out there and monitoring the situation.
Yeah, and let's face it, it's only a temporary thing that you can do anyhow. Like I've used the sock booms and industry and stuff,
Well,
or I've been a part of the crews that have been, and
yeah, they're
it's kind of
intended. They're intending for a temporary fix, aren't they? You know, where you can clean up the area affected, and but how unless you're cleaning it up, the sock boom's totally ineffective. The stuff will go under or over somehow.
well, yeah. If the water was stationary, then you can put on pads too. There's these absorbent pads you could throw out there.
Yeah.
But that's for a limited spill. Like
I've
there's
seen that
been a
on a lake.
spill, and
Yeah, I've seen that on a lake. I've certainly seen some things where they cleaned up, lakes or relatively still waters.
yeah, then they can use the pads to absorb what's there. But those are limited leaks. This one's a continuous one.
Yeah.
So you'd have to put pad after pad after pad and then take it out. And I don't know. So wherever the leak is coming from, the source of it is our problem here.
Yeah. And there seems to be a lack of, either the city seems to be unwilling to do something about it or doesn't have the right knowledge. Councillor Lococo addressed the fact that since July, councillors and staff have received numerous calls. She wanted to know where the leak is coming from and why it hasn't been stopped. And in response to her questions, the CAO, Burgess, responded saying, "We only have so much legislative authority. We don't have the technical skills to be involved in this stuff. It's been very difficult for the city to take the lead on some of these items. We have to rely upon the ministry and other participants to have the responsibility." That sounds a cop-out to me.
Well, it is in a certain way, but he is right. And basically, it's down to the ministry to ferret out what was the problem. But they don't seem to be too interested.
Yeah. And meanwhile, things are getting poisoned.
Yeah. So basically, what the ministry seems to have done is, oh yeah, you're right. There's a leak. Well, what are you going to do about it? Well, we'll have to set up anyway. Mike Cushman has chimed in saying, "I believe that when it rains, something is overflowing." Okay.
Yeah. Right. And once every Tuesday they change them. Oh, okay. Once a week they change them. Doesn't seem enough to me, especially since the pictures in the pointer are clearly showing that is just simply bypassing it.
Well, yeah, and every Tuesday they change it so they can say they're doing something about it, but I don't know where the investigation process has been. Well, I guess Mike can freshen us up about that, but there has to be an investigation process. Changing the boom every Tuesday. Well, how many Tuesdays into the future have we wait before we figure out what that is?
Yeah,
and where it's coming from.
Oh yeah, absolutely. All right.
And do they even know what it is?
Yeah. All valid questions. Yeah, absolutely valid questions. Okay, so Canada is going to tighten the rules upon temporary workers and students. Now, Canada is going to reduce the study permits to 437 next year. The work permit eligibility has been tightened for spouses of students and foreign workers. Right, and so it should be in some respects. Why are students bringing their family here?
Well, this is they really blew it here. What they did when they had a labor shortage, they were able to, in order to fill it up, they were able to drop a lot of the requirements for temporary students. And when the temporary students came in, they were allowed to bring their spouses so that they could come in as temporary workforce, which really messed things up. It was really poorly thought out, and this is pointed out by representatives of the government behind closed doors, and just about everybody going, that this was a really bad situation. The Canadian government overreacted, and it allowed too many people in with too little visa requirements. It dropped a lot of the visa requirements. So of course you get this huge tsunami of people trying to get in as a student anywhere, anyhow.
Yeah.
And because the requirements were reduced, that made it a lot easier for them to get in, and they brought their spouses along to take up jobs. Now the Canadian government, and of course they played by the rules that were there.
Of course,
they played by the rules to get into.
I'm not criticizing the students here. They've done everything. They've done exactly what was permitted of them.
Yeah, and I would have done the same thing. So so would have you.
Exactly. If we were in that same situation, we likely would have done exactly the same thing.
So the students, now what I do now, and what it did really was put a beacon of hope for a lot of people to get into the country. And their expectations were, once they got here, they were going to be able to stay here, like a lot of students already can, and work in the process. Now it really messed things up badly. It put a big stress on the healthcare system, big stress on the housing. It brought in a lot of students that were incapable of doing their studies because they didn't, they weren't, or be able to go to school because the requirements for how much money they had to have here and the rest were diminished. This is still going on, though. A few days ago, I met a bunch of new students come into the country at Staples, and when I was asking everybody for donations, they're telling me I had to come up with $13,000 to come here. I got no money at all. I'm a student, and their language skills weren't always the greatest. So I'm wondering, here's these young guys coming into the country. Their language skills weren't exactly the greatest, and their $13,000, they said, they had to have that to get here. So it looks like they're on a shoestring as it is, even with the requirements they have to meet.
Yeah.
And so you can imagine the ones they brought in when they reduced the requirements to get in here, and even at that, it's easier for Canada to get a Canadian visa than it is to get a U.S. visa, for instance. That's why so many of them are going across. Well, we'll talk about that later, but there's a whole raft of them going across into the States, getting smuggled into the States from Canada. Yeah. Well, my problem with this, one of my problems with this is aside from the government's total ineptitude here, and it's hard to describe it in any other way, that the government has permitted all these people in to come in as temporary workers or students, and what it does then, it opens the path for many of them to get into the country and take up residencies and strain the system and all that other stuff that we've already talked about. But what it has done too is they've taken, particularly in this particular case, particularly Indians, but anyone from around the world that happen to be able to come.
Yeah, just because it's Indians that they're talking about in this particular case doesn't mean it's only Indians.
Yes, and now they've dashed their expectations. So these people have come over, playing by the rules, come over with the expectation of being able to stay here and become citizens. And you can't blame them for getting that idea, because that's generally what the idea is, that Canada will take on the graduates that it feels have accomplished a certain level of academia. But it really doesn't, because somebody can get a graduate in just about anything, and maintain that they could stay here and bring in their spouse. So you imagine you come over to go to school and you bring your spouse, and okay, you begin your life journey in Canada, and then somebody comes and says, well, we made a big mistake. We let you into the country. We shouldn't have. Goodbye. You got to go.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah.
I spent all that money getting here. I've spent all that time establishing myself, and now you're telling me I got to go?
Yeah. And, when you bring students over, it's just the student, not their family.
Well, that's where it should be, but in this particular case, it's changed.
Yeah. I think the bringing of family, temporary foreign workers that I've met locally here on the Niagara on the Lake farms, they don't bring their family.
No, they're not entitled to. And this is part of the biggest problem there is. Now the farm workers are a little bit different. That's been well established. This is a brand new sort of tsunami of people that came into the country as temporary foreign workers or students with reduced requirements to get here. So basically what they've done is they've opened the door to a lot of underqualified people that come into Canada and to study what, who knows, anything. That's the whole point. Get here and get established somewhere in a college or university or private university. Once you're done that, then the expectation thereafter is you're going to be able to stay. And even those that are like, I met a young lad who sold me this phone. Basically, he's trying to stay in Canada, and he can't. Now he speaks English perfectly. He's got a very good education. But most of them like, a lot of them take hospitality. So they come to Niagara College or something, and they take hospitality. Well, how many jobs are you going to get in hospitality? And everybody's taking a university course in hospitality. It's like I don't know, the law, crime and punishment type of courses they have that people are attracted to and can't get a job at,
Yeah.
So the expectations they've provided for people, now they tell them they got to go. Can you imagine yourself being in that situation where you've had a chance to come to Canada, you're anxious to start a new life? You bring your wife or your husband, and you bring them over, and they get a job, temporary job. Okay, I'm established. I'm in school. They're working, and someone says, "Well, you got to go now." Hey, wait a minute! I just got here. So and the fact that the Canadian government really didn't think this out. You notice that this has happened right after they talked to Mark Carney, didn't you? Mark Carney was very, very critical of Chrystia Freeland's last budget, and the Bank of Canada and a host of other people have warned this for some time, and Carney himself has said, and now and this guy's no like right-wing dude. I mean, he's way to the left, Carney, and he's gone to the Liberal retreat in BC. He was the guest speaker, and now the new right-hand economic advisor of the Liberals. He laid it on the line, and the articles in the paper were pretty clear about that. That's what he's going to tell them. He says your immigration thing is way offline.
It is.
Now Miller, the immigration guy, prior to that, about a couple of weeks prior to that, said he's tightening up the rules, and right after that meeting with Carney, they came up with, well, we got to get rid of people like really quick now, and we really have to tighten up our immigration. And there's another reason for this is they have to do something, or they're going to put the students in a vulnerable position because people are beginning to dislike them. Canada is normally a very open country and very accepting and tolerant as countries go, but there is a lot of public resentment now going on.
A lot of public resentment, and this is likely to become a big election issue next year.
Well, the public resentment, unfortunately, then will become, unfortunately, what happens in human nature. They focus on the people that have come to the country instead of focusing their ire against the government that brought them in here irresponsibly.
Yeah.
And now they're trying to turn that back quite a bit. I think there's immediately 70,000 students that are up for deportation, and of course the students themselves are demonstrating.
Of course they are, because where their planned future is all changed all of a sudden. All right, let's talk about these smugglers. Right, so smugglers are advertising illegal US-Canadian border crossings on TikTok.
Yeah,
so they're taking people who are in Canada, across into the US through illegal borders, border crossings.
Yeah, this is something that's like this has always been a concern. As we remember, they found frozen bodies in I think it was Manitoba.
Yeah,
people smugglers were taking, and then people from all over the world. But in this particular case, it's most typically Indians, but they take them from all over the world, and they take them across the border clandestinely. And they get money for that.
Basically, the comments about this is that the people who are doing it, their questions about it, and there's the smugglers are saying, we do this every day. It takes 1 hour to arrive at the destination from where you need to walk 40 minutes through the jungle. The question, is it safe? Yes, brother. It's not our first time, says the smuggler. Right. So they've clearly done it time and again.
Yeah, and as I said before, a visa requirement for Canada is a lot easier for one than in the United States. So people who are trying to get to the United States will come to Canada, and then they'll make their way across into the United States. That was true of a lot of the Mexicans. Remember, we had we stopped the visa requirements for Mexico, and we got, I think, thousands of Mexicans coming up here, and many of them tried to then sneak from the north into the United States. This has been a big problem in Quebec, where the incidences of people going across into the States is ballooned. In this particular case, it's mostly Indians again trying to get in, but a couple of years ago, I didn't even know if it was a whole year, couple of years ago, in the St. Regis reserves that in Eastern Ontario, in Quebec, there where the Indigenous reserves, they were taking people across at night in boats, and we do remember they had a boat that was capsized, and I think it was 8 people got killed there. And they were from all over the place too. They were from different parts.
Well, just because the example in both of these stories has talked about Indians, but it's not just Indians; it's other, people from other nationalities as well.
Well, it seems that Indians or people from the subcontinent are among the most. Like India, Pakistan, Bangladesh are among.
They have the biggest population, and and today. Traveling to America for many Indians is actually a bigger goal than coming to somewhere like Britain or Canada.
The number of irregular entries into U.S. from Canada has exploded in recent months. Such irregular crossings are prohibited by Canadian and American laws. People wanting to cross the border. However, we really don't because the border is so forested and difficult. If you had a proper guide, a proper woods person, they a guy who knew the forest and so on, you could probably smuggle a lot of people into the States and make a fair amount of money.
Yeah, he charges £1,500, 1,500 per person, or for a couple it's 2,500. And this was of course the reporter doing doing an investigation into it, and obviously replying to the to the seller on TikTok.
Yeah, and their advertising, they use testimonials, just like any other advertising we might see on TV.
Yeah.
They say, brother, we have come to the, like, so they have a witness, a testimonial from a successful um, illegal immigrant that came from Canada into the U.S. Says, brother, we have come to the U.S. from Canada, and we have just arrived. We have come through Brother Harry. His services are standing. We have come through very easily. And that's one of the testimonials, right? So they're advertising, and brazenly on TikTok, talk to us and we'll get you into the States. We know how to do it. And as I said before, I think we're going to get under some kind of pressure from the U.S. to stop easy visas getting into Canada.
Well, and of course, Trump's next wall will be across the Quebec border, won't it?
Well, I think that if Trump gets in, he says he's going to deport 11 million illegals. 11 million. He's going to deport them. So you can imagine what kind of pressure is going to be on our border if at the minute he gets elected. There's going to be a tsunami of people trying to get into Canada because they're afraid of getting deported. And I don't think we're prepared for that. I think we just don't have the ability. And Canadian immigration has always been kind of a joke. I remember how much of a joke it was back in the 80s when the Canadian government said we had the strongest and best immigration policies, and yet just right after they announced that, it was revealed in the Middle East they had all kinds of fake documents that got people into Canada. So there was I don't know, something like thousands of these fake documents that are already being used in different places in Lebanon, Syria, or whatever, that could get people into Canada, and that had been ongoing for some time, and they didn't even know about it. And so it kind of, they said, oh, we're really good, and then just months later there was a story about how really bad they are. And the Arab guys that I talked to, the guys from Syria, Lebanon, and Palestine and Egypt and all that, they all told me it's a piece of cake getting into Canada. All you have to do is connect to the right people, and you can get in easy as anything. Get in as a permanent resident.
Yeah. And this is gonna become quite an election. The immigration stuff is already an election issue, and half the how many percentage of people who are coming into Canada don't really want to come to Canada. They want to go to the US.
Yeah, quite often, and we find that there's this huge, and there's the other problem as well, as once qualified immigrants come to the country and establish themselves here, many of them don't wait too long before they use their position as a Canadian to get into the United States and establish themselves there. We have a brain drain right now going into the United States, according to other articles I've read leading up to this. The illegal stuff is only part of it. The other part is how many of the people we have brought into the country and then establish themselves and find greener pastures in the U.S.
Yeah,
because there's better opportunities down there. So then we go through the bother of bringing them here, educating them, and then they leave.
Yeah, I've thought about it.
Sure.
I've thought about moving on.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah. You're going to go where it's best for you, aren't you?
Yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
Okay, so moving on. Local residents saying we were silenced. They're critical, being critical of the controversial Niagara Falls quarry, which is being opened by Walkers. I think it's Walkers. Yeah, Walker is aggregate. So they're basically the local community. So a public meeting was denied in our community, and during a delegation, said during a delegation to. This is David Rupe said during a delegation to the city council last week. The right of citizens and those affected by the application are not permitted to speak to our representatives with the latest information, as 2 months ago about merits about living next door to a quarry. Right, this one, it came up in the 20. It came up in the 2022 election. I was asked questions about it at that time.
Yeah, and it's come up in council a fair amount of times, hasn't it?
Yes, it has.
So you're the legal on this one. Like the people say that they now have been silenced because the applicant is a perfect right for the applicant to say that there's been no decision within 120 days on their application, and then they can now take it further and to the land
Ontario Land
tribunal.
Tribunal. Well, essentially, what people like David Rupe need to do is they need to get somebody who can represent them on the Ontario Land Tribunal, right, as a third party, as an interested third party. And there are rules about doing that. So if you know about Walker's, application to the Ontario Land Tribunal, you can get somebody like myself to actually represent you at the Land Tribunal.
Now, the city planner here, Andrew Bryce, said that the city and the region entered into a memorandum of understanding with the applicant that as long as a joint agency review team process was ongoing, they would agree not to appeal the application. The joint, so JART is the is the acronym for that.
Yeah.
The JART report was released to the applicant on August 13th, and the city clerk received the appeal on August 14th. So anyway, the city solicitor, Nadi Punyarti, said that the Planning Act has been amended, so there is pressure on municipalities to make decisions by a statutory timeline of 120 days. She said that even so basically my point here is it true that the residents and those have no voice now unless they do hire a lawyer?
Well,
and that will add a fair amount of expense to their to their opposition.
A lot of this, essentially, this is going to be decided at the Ontario Land Tribunal.
Yes, and how are they going to be able to make an honest assessment without the citizens being there? How do we know that the Land Tribunal will be able to consider
that? Actually is one of the complexities about Land Tribunal. Like, as with everywhere, as with a lot of these tribunals, the Land Tribunal brings in its adjudicators from all over the province, and when it comes down to it, the Land Tribunal doesn't no longer visits the local cities. It's all held online through WebEx or WebEx, Teams, or Zoom, and these are these basically are done. All of the decisions are done online without anybody knowing and seeing the local area. Right? There was a time when the predecessors to the Ontario Land Tribunal would come and take a look at the subject lands. They do no longer do that.
Do they need to, though?
Well, actually, there are many people that argue they do, but essentially the auspices of the Ontario Land Tribunal are really about procedural, what's permitted in the Planning Act, etc. And I hasten to add that, hey, one of the questions about the Planning Act is, yes, it is a thing that is governed by the Planning Act, but remember, the bylaw 79-200 is not officially linked to the current Planning Act. It's only linked to a prior Planning Act, and therefore, is problematic.
Well, Ruby said it says here that to avoid discussion related to NIMBY, not my backyard, another petition was developed and is in the progress. It is against new quarries in Niagara Falls. So they've wisely thought that if they have a petition against this particular quarry, it looks like a NIMBY thing, not in my backyard. Quarries are good anywhere. So what they wisely did was try to get total more support by saying we shouldn't have another quarry in Niagara Falls at all. Now, Niagara Falls is an overbounded city. To say that you can't have a quarry in Niagara Falls when Niagara Falls has a lot of empty land that could probably, could be developed into quarries or other things, that's a big reach. But I can understand why they did that. They can then say that, Niagara Falls people all in all don't like quarries. We don't want them. And it's not just this quarry. It's any potential quarry.
Yeah. But not just this quarry is, okay. The question is that in order to build roads, in order to build, housing stock, etc., we need the products that come out of the quarries. And we also need local employment, right? So those are the arguments that can be made in favor of the quarries. And the question about some of the questions opposing quarries. Well, we know that trucks moving up and down country roads is probably less than desirable. But again, one of the questions is that the city, generally speaking, if there's a planning application, the city is looking for comments and feedback primarily from those people that are living within 120 meters of the property. There's nobody lives 120 meters. I think there's 3 houses within 120 meters of said property.
Yeah, it's definitely a fear of the people that bought stuff around there that their property become devalued, become less. And plus, of course, the heavy machinery and everything else is going to be going up and down the road. May have their properties look less attractive. They bought them out in the countryside, so they didn't have to put up with that kind of thing. However, they didn't do their homework. I think if they had, they would have seen that land had already been bought by walkers. I think, and walkers have been.
These new subdivisions
that are out there for a while time.
Yeah, these new subdivisions that are out there. Walkers have owned that land for quite some time. Right? The notices have been up on that land at least 2 or 3 years. To my recollection, I I went out there at least a couple of years ago when this whole came up in 22. I actually had a look and reminded myself of the lands around there. It's a very complicated question because, in fact, I looked at the estate there, where most of the people who are complainants on this matter are, and not sure that they're that badly affected by it. Right? Obviously, I'd like to hear. I'd happily hear from somebody who says they are. You know how it impacts them.
Well, the quarry behind Bevan Heights was there before and long after Bevan Heights was built. It's very close to a very exclusive neighborhood in St. David's there, and the quarry's right beside it. And the quarry went on and worked all the time. Now, of course, those residents, I knew somebody lived up there, and they were worried about blasting from time to time in the quarry. So they did complain about that. But the quarry was there, and it went on, and now they've exhausted that quarry, and I think they're gonna fill it up and build high-end housing in there. I think because the quarry is now being exhausted. It's not a viable economic enterprise anymore. So I don't know. That happened right where there is a very high-end neighborhood, and it's a lot closer than these places are that like David Rupia. He's the guy here that's complaining and telling everybody that this is no good, and
Karen is basically saying those residents were silenced right from the start by the way the committee was set up. A few citizens and a lot of staff and council. The provincial aggregate council said there is already enough aggregate produced in Ontario. Okay, so Karen disagrees about the need to produce more aggregate.
Well, I disagree. I disagree. We're going to need aggregate, and if we have to bring it in from other places. Now, I don't know whether or not this quarry is going to go ahead, but I don't buy that one bit at all. I don't buy the fact that we need aggregate right here in this area because it's a lot cheaper using your own aggregate than having it shipped in from somewhere else.
Well, that's what
you're going to get all kinds of aggregate up in northern Ontario. There's granite up there, and they've blasted for roads, and they've got all that kinds of extra aggregate up there. But you got to bring it all the way down here.
I was going to say, but in fact, actually, there you have it. If you get aggregate from here, you're reducing the trucking costs, for example.
Yeah, so obviously Walker's doesn't agree with them. Walker's is going to invest an incredible amount of money developing a quarry for aggregate. Why would they do that if there's a surplus of supply? It doesn't make sense. That if there is a surplus of supply of aggregate, then why would they develop a quarry to make aggregate? They would lose money. So that part of it doesn't really make sense. I mean, people have come up and said, oh, well, there's a surplus of aggregate all over Ontario. If so, why do quarries keep opening, and why do quarries keep, why is there this need then for this aggregate? It doesn't make business sense to start a quarry to supply aggregate to a market that is flush with aggregate. It doesn't make any sense. So the idea that there is too much aggregate in Ontario, if there was too much aggregate in Ontario, the quarry wouldn't have developed this. It just doesn't make any sense that they would have that. So what they're basically saying is we need the aggregate. We need the aggregate for construction. The opponents to that said, well, there's all kinds of it all over Ontario, so we don't need to develop this. So should we develop one in St. Catharines? They're going to go through the same process. Say, nope, not in my backyard. Should we go then to Welland? They're going to do the same thing. And they're all going to say there's too much aggregate in Ontario already. And then you have all these quarry companies like Walker. They're going to invest huge amounts of money into creating a quarry for a province that has a surplus of aggregate. Don't think so.
Well, I don't know. I've heard both stories, and I don't know whether there's a surplus of aggregate, but I also buy the fact that if you get aggregate locally, it's much cheaper.
Yeah, that's part of it, and I suppose that's part of it. But obviously, there is a market case for this aggregate.
Yeah.
When you say you have a surplus of aggregate, and you're going to make a massive investment to create a quarry, why would you do that? Why would you create an aggregate quarry when there's a surplus of aggregate?
Yeah.
So that argument just does not float, because nobody's going to make that kind of massive investment unless they think they're going to make money.
Yeah.
And they can't make money if there's a surplus of aggregate. So obviously there's not a surplus of aggregate. In particular, and right now we have a lot of need for building materials. Obviously, we need to build more houses, more roads, all that other stuff. All these huge projects are on the way. Now, it says here the JART committee, that as I said before, was the joint agency something team. Oh God, or in review team, joint agency review team. The residents will be waiting for the final bill to be tabulated. Now, there's something in here that the councilors aren't too happy about this, but they can't take a position. That the government, Niagara Falls, has spent a lot of money studying this particular case with the JART initiative, but that seems to have all been wasted. If I read this right, the councilors can't be too happy about it. But on the other hand, Rupi, who is the petitioner there, he wants the councilors to take a position, but they can't now. They can't, because now it's outside their jurisdiction, even though they can.
Absolutely, they won't, because they where city council is right now is if it's with the OOT, they won't even talk about this.
It says here the JART committee was formed many months ago. A significant amount of money has been spent by the city in contracts executed for 3 consulting firms, an aggregate advisor, in addition to the time spent by city and regional staff. To what avail?
Yeah.
The residents of Niagara Falls will be waiting for the final bill to be tabulated and presumably, hopefully, identified and reported in a list of city expenditures. So now what happens then? Does the city then launch an appeal? Now, City Clerk Bill Matson said that the council can't comment or take position because the issue is now before the OLT.
Okay, and Karen is basically saying she's not against the quarry, but if there's a watershed, if the whole watershed has to be destroyed, then is it worth it? And that's my biggest concern about that, because you've got the rivers running through there.
It's not a river; it's a creek. It's a very, very small. And believe me, I'm with you there, because there could be some rare salamanders or anything in there, and it has to be studied. But didn't the quarry say that they were going to make allowances for that?
Yeah, they did. That was part of their original proposal. They was going to make allowances for that entire thing.
Yeah, kind of reroute it and keep
Yeah.
it connected.
But there was basically what they were going to do was run either conduits, conduits that would pipelines basically that would keep that river flowing across the land.
Yeah, I can. Yeah, so I don't know how they're going to deal with that, but they did have a plan,
Yeah, they did.
an environmental plan. I don't know if it was adequate enough. And it's a small. I went up there myself when this was going on, and we discussed it. I don't know. It was last year. I went up there and viewed it myself, and of course, that was the thing that got me. There was this small creek, slow moving creek. Is it Uppers Creek? Anyway, it's there, and
well, there's a bridge across the upper street and the parallel street to it. Yes, yeah, I've been there and looked at, sat on that bridge and looked at it. Yeah,
yeah. So I've looked at the creek and wondered how it would be affected by all this. And we can't discount this as just one little slow moving creek. There could be lots of different things that live in there that might be even just exclusive to that creek. So the environmental process has to really kick in. And yet we haven't had too many. I can't think of anything officially by the ministry that puts up an alarm.
Yeah, and Karen's making the point that small creek is just a portion of the whole watershed. And one of the things that I was looking at with that, because in fact, it's part and parcel of that water area that's utilized by the Welland Canal during the summer months.
How much of the water? How much of the watershed would be affected by the quarry, though?
That was a question that was asked at City Council, and nobody seemed to have the answer.
Well, there's the one small creek that's going through it. Would have been obviously part of the watershed, but do you disrupt the whole watershed by just sort of rerouting that creek? I'm not so sure if the whole watershed, the whole watershed is at risk.
Yeah,
in that particular case, I'd like to know what they want to do after. I think they get 25 or 30 years of aggregate. They feel they can get out of that hole. Then they'd have to fill it back up. Are they going to make another landfill? That would really excite the people around there, wouldn't it? Well, now that we're now that we've dug this big hole, it's time to fill it up with garbage.
Yeah, and then for the next 50 years, people will be going in their cars and dumping on that plot of land.
Yeah, the quarry itself, I'm like with Karen, I got nothing against the quarry, and as I said before, it doesn't make any sense that they would put that much of investment if we have a surplus of aggregate in Ontario. That's just doesn't make any sense. Why make that incredible investment? By buying the land and having all kinds of plans set in place, that's enough money at all. And then you got to bring in the heavy equipment and all that and produce aggregate that they can't sell. No, it doesn't make any sense at all. However, I am worried about that creek. And when I went out there too, I couldn't see too many people being too affected by the machinery and stuff going on there from the distance from where their houses are.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
Exactly my conclusion.
Yeah.
That was exactly.
No, I can understand. Like the guy who bought the property out there, wants a nice country place and all that other stuff. But if he had done his homework, I think if he would have found out that Walkers had rights to that land. Now, all we can do is hope that a fair decision comes down the pipeline. And what is your being legal dude? What is your experience on fair decisions coming down that?
Well, actually, funnily enough, I'm dealing with an OLT matter in a distant city. And I was speaking with the lawyers on that one, and the subject of OLT decisions came up there. And the lawyers basically say the city lawyers basically saying, well, they too often fine for the citizens, and whereas most citizens believe that the OLT fines for the developer.
Yeah, so it's probably doing its job. As long as all the information is there, okay, I suppose they can come up with a ruling that's proper. I really, it looks more like Walker's is going to win this, but I'm a bit irked by all the money and planning that in organizations that the city has set up or in the region has set up to kind of study this. But there is a law that says if you don't make a decision in 120 days, we get to appeal it. Now, does the city then appeal as well?
It seemed to me that
can they appeal the appeal?
There are methods. You can go to the courts afterwards. Yes, they have a review mechanism, and then if the review doesn't get the right result, you can appeal it. There is a mechanism.
Well, so the council can't provide any position at all on this.
Yeah,
because
they declined to during their meeting, didn't they? And they were in an awkward situation that they took a balance.
They were waiting for the joint agency review team to come up with their recommendations. So how come nobody saw this coming? So they start submitting reports and they get the JART thing going, the JART committee going, and then nobody tapped them on the shoulder and says, hey, you better come up with something within 120 days or they're going to appeal it. And then all your work is for naught.
Yeah, fair question. Somebody didn't keep their eye on the ball.
Yeah, my biggest concern with that is the creek, of course. I'm not so sure that it will affect the people that are living there that bad at all.
That's exactly the way I looked at it. I'm not too sure that with that new housing estate that's there, that they're badly impacted at all. Most of their cars go in and out of another route. It's a noisy.
Yes. So yeah, and then there may be a bit of NIMBY thing going on here, and of course the fear that things going to expand. And I do remember there was issues with the quarry up in Queenston Heights there. People were worried about the blasting, and every once in a while it got a little bit too loud for them, and there were people with a lot of money up there, so they had influence. And
that's being redeveloped.
The quarry kept going.
Yeah, and that's being redeveloped right now.
That's it. Well, I'm talking back when the quarry was still active.
Yeah, I know.
So the quarry was still active, and they had machines there too to crush the aggregate, so it would have made noise, and of course the heavy equipment, the blasting, and all that. But that quarry now is exhausted, so it's no longer an issue. But it was for decades an issue there.
Yeah.
And what happened was the quarry kept going.
Yep. All right. Okay. So before we go leave, let's quickly discuss the question about different hours for the city of Niagara Falls.
Well, Mike Strange must have been listening to Paul K. Lemire's show that day when he came up with this, because the complaint during the city council review, the agenda, Paul and I both brought up the fact that Mike Strange had suggested brought up the fact that the meetings were going on too long and wanted to reduce time. But then thereafter, several months did not come up with any suggestions of his own. and the whole idea was sort of left in limbo. We have these extremely long meetings. He brought up that issue, but then did not offer any advice as to, or any suggestions. Now, it was his motion. He brought it up, and yet he didn't fill in the blanks for anybody. But in this particular meeting, he did. It was almost as if he was listening to Paul's show, because he just pretty much parroted a lot of stuff that Paul had suggested, or I don't know if it's him or I, but I think it's probably Paul. He's better off with this. So finally, Strange, who suggested it in the first place, but then just kind of left it hanging, came up with a few suggestions and started the conversation going again. So this is, we might get shorter meetings. And one of the things he wanted to do is what was suggested by Paul as well, is to have the in-camera meeting ahead of the regular meeting, because you have this huge gap where people are trying to watch come to the council meeting, and then they've got an hour and a half in-camera meeting, or even if it's half an hour or whatever, that interrupts the whole meeting.
Essentially, that would help, because if the meeting's going to start at 4, why can't they hold their and everybody knows I'm opposed to in-camera meetings, a lot of the in-camera meetings that go on, but if they're supposed to start city council at 4 p.m., let's start the city council at 4 p.m., get the in-camera meeting, get the in-camera meeting started at 1 p.m. or something, or earlier.
Yeah. And a lot of the presentations and things like that, although I don't think it was brought up, but Strange didn't bring that stuff up, but they're talking about 5-minute limits already, counselors, as well as, because you have a 5-minute limit if you're a presenter or a commenter on the meeting, and the counselors want to be restricted to 5 minutes. But that's a little bit of a problem, because
I have a problem with that. I have a problem with councillors. Yeah, because in fact, actually, we're relying upon city council to make an informed decision. If council members have only got 5 minutes to speak or question or something like that, then they're not necessarily getting to the root of the issue in that 5 minutes.
But I think what can be eliminated was councillors, after a development happens or such other, they stand up and they self-aggrandize in a way of saying, "Oh, I really like this. I think this is very good for the city. The city really needs this. We are wonderful. We are great. I'm great. And I really like this because I need to get my face in this camera, so everybody knows that I'm here." So that kind of thing can go away. We don't need anybody standing up and start saying, "Congratulations to such and such. We really like your development. It's going to be great." Once you've passed it, shut up about it. That's it.
Yeah.
I mean,
get on to the next.
You don't need all that gab.
Yeah.
And you don't need all that gab leading up to it.
Yeah. The vote occurs. Next business.
Poignant questions and comments only.
Yeah.
Is there enough parking, Mr. So-and-so? I don't think there's enough parking, Mr. So-and-so. Can you leave? And then you can say to the rest of the councilors, we are asking, we can go ahead with this, but I'm not going to vote for it unless we get more parking, period. That's it.
That kind of thing I'm in favor of, because in fact, then we can get those particular views aired. Particularly if those concerns come from residents affected. You talked about parking. That is a typical type of thing, because if there isn't enough parking, hey, that means they're going to be parking on my street 200 meters away.
Yeah, so it's quite an issue here, but there's a lot of presentations and things at the beginning of the meetings, and Paul brought this up too. He sees that a lot of the councilors later on in their meetings looking very tired, and they're not at their best.
No.
So we are already going to get more meetings. We're going to get one every 3 weeks instead of once a month, I think. plus
Well, I think we should have we should have them twice a week, twice a month. I mean,
twice a month.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, twice a month would be better, I think, to have shorter meetings.
Obviously, we may need to make adjustments to that for the summer months, and we might need to make adjustment for that for December, of course. Probably one meeting in December.
But I think that those things have to be, if there's an emergency meeting or something like that, can happen anytime if you really need an extra meeting.
It can.
But the problem here is the councilors are not prepared. Wayne Campbell says, I always go to staff. So some of the questions are needless because the implication here is many of the councilors don't do their homework,
read the material,
and ask questions that are needless if they had read the reports ahead of time.
Yeah, and in fact, actually, there was a report circulating at the last election that one of the councillors would break open the bundle 5 minutes before the council meeting and had done no prior preparation, and that said councillor was one of those that would just simply ask the staff, and if the staff didn't have an answer, he wouldn't be voting on it.
For somebody who's run meetings, union meetings or other meetings, there's nothing more infuriating
than people
answering the same question over and over again.
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
This person, and when everybody should know what it is.
Preparation is key.
Yes, preparation is key. And like I said, for anybody that's run a meeting, like a union meeting or something else, and you get a question about something that's common knowledge, and you have to then explain it all over again, or they were supposed to know about this, like contract negotiations or something. Somebody brings up an issue that's been solved 2 contracts ago,
exactly,
and you have to go through this process of explaining it, because they don't get it. So that's a big thing. Preparation by counselors. Stop I think it's wonderful, great, and I really like to, congratulate Mr. Smith Apartment Building Company and how wonderful the design is and how it's going to enhance the city and make us more classy and look at me type of comments. That has to go. Plus, all the presentations and things at the beginning, that kind of slows things down. I think they should be in a separate meeting altogether or a separate place. Maybe once a month or something, the mayor could get together with all the people that have to have presentations and give it to them.
I think those presentations actually add value to the meeting, to be quite honest.
I don't.
You don't?
I think not at the meeting. Those presentations should have something devoted to them, because right now they're blended with the meeting, and I don't particularly like that. The city hall meeting is more to do with business. I would much prefer a separate separate show for presentations. That way you can talk a little bit more about it. Here's Joe. He's Josephine. She's a great hockey player. That kind of thing. To recognize the individuals, you give them more time. I think it's a separate entity myself.
So if you were saying, what you're saying is, if you were through the work you do with Kiwanis, etc., you were about to receive a mayor's award, you'd prefer that there was like a monthly dinner for the mayor's award.
Not a monthly dinner, just like a council meeting, but just devoted to those those people who will get some sort of
So maybe at City Hall, but at a separate time.
Yeah, separate time and devoted only to that.
Yeah. Well,
I mean, when I went to get my award, when I got a volunteer award at the city, they had a special place for it. It was at Stanford Fire Hall, the Farmers Park there, and they had a whole separate thing right there. Rather than bring these people up in a council meeting to present them the awards, they did it in a special place.
Yeah,
right. I think that that kind
I
of
just don't want to.
citation should be done in a different place.
Yeah. There's merit to what you say. I just don't want to lose the accolades that we give to our local people that do good things.
Well, I think they would get better accolades if there was a one sort of city council thing, and maybe the once a month have a sort of presentation that the mayor or councilors can do that have nothing to do with city business and just focus on those people.
Yeah, so long as it's not lost. So long as it's
because what happens is people are watching city council, and those people, most people are just kind of going like this with their fingers, waiting for all this to get over with, so they can get in, see what's going to happen. And for those few members that are related to those people, they're all enjoyed and stuff like that. But the rest of the people who are watching that thinking, "Oh man, I got to wait through this." I'm glad that Josephine's a great hockey player.
I'm waiting. We're twiddling our thumbs at item 4 on the agenda, and I'm waiting here for 10.13.
Yeah. So the whole thing is very efficient. You have all these presentations at the beginning, and then you have an in-camera meeting right in the middle, and then you have this long meeting thereafter. So I don't know how it got so bad, but Mike Strange said that it's too long, and then he didn't say anything about it thereafter, and now he has finally come up with some suggestions. So maybe they can shorten it up. I don't see anything in the future, as I don't think they're willing to do too much.
Okay, I think we're going to have to leave it there, though. Karen's put a couple of comments in. In years gone by, councillors met every 2 weeks, and that way they stayed on top of things and didn't run late. That's exactly my feeling of that. If you aren't willing to do the preparation, you shouldn't run for city council in the first place. 100%. If I'd have been on city council on council meeting day, I'd have been dedicating my day to the city council meeting. All right. And the city the city has volunteer recognition nights. There we go.
Yeah, and I was a recipient of one of those volunteer awards, and it was done in a separate place. And I think the idea of whatever kind of congratulatory type of stuff happens at council leading into council should happen perhaps once a month in a separate meeting, televised as well, where people can say, well, here's Josephine. She's the best hockey player in town, and we like to give her some kind of award.
You can give
somebody out of the lake who saved his life. We like to talk, present him.
You can give a better background to that kind of stuff as well.
Yes, you can.
Instead of the mayor kind of let's run through this and get it done as quick as possible, which I did get that impression of when on the few that I've seen, on the ones that I've seen. You get this. You can kind of let's celebrate what our heroes have done, right? So here we've got Josephine. She did this. Let's talk to Josephine about her story.
Yeah, and you can prepare ahead of time, because the mayor or somebody could say, "Look, Josephine would like you to say a few words, a little anecdote or something."
Yeah, not just the mayor, because it could be somebody. It could be somebody where Victor Peterangelo is the right
whoever
to make a presentation. Or
whoever.
Whoever. Yeah,
doesn't matter whoever. It could be the King of England. Doesn't matter.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Doesn't matter who it is. Anyway, you can make a little bit more of a show. I can tell your story a little bit better.
Yeah.
But in any case, I think Karen's right. Every 2 weeks or twice a month at least, that would be a better option.
2 weeks, 2 weekly meetings, except in December, generally speaking.
But what drives me nuts is that, I love this development.
No, that drives me nuts as well.
Oh God.
Electioneering drives in meetings drives me nuts.
Yeah. And I really like it because I really like the color of that building. Someone else was saying, well, they're only 400 square feet inside. Yeah, but the color, it's wonderful. It's going to match the city limit.
Objection, Mr. Mayor. Why is Councillor Wheeler prattling on about this? All right.
Because I really like the color, man.
All right. I think we're going to have to end this at that point.
Okay. So, further ado, I bid you adieu. Thank you for caring for your suggestions.